Yeah, sure. I'll get started.
All right, let's do it.
So let me figure out how to share my screen. Share the article. All right, here it is. There, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I was saying a little bit earlier about how this is a fairly sort of straightforward article and a pretty straightforward study, but I was hoping that I could go over it really quickly, and then maybe we could open a discussion about sort of what exactly the implications of what it found exactly was. So let me scroll down a little bit. So I thought it was interesting that they sort of drew parallels between virtual reality and movies in terms of presence and emotional responses. And yeah, I think that the only real parallels that we have are sort of movies and books as something that can cause sort of um, presence and sort of losing where you are. And I think that each medium has its own sort of identity in that way. And it sort of sucks people into the medium in different ways. And I think that virtual reality is different because it's much quicker in order to do that. I know that most movies I watch, I'm not always 100% present, but virtual reality tends to do that a lot quicker, which is, I think, a cool aspect of it. So it starts out with a little bit of introduction of what exactly it means by some of the terms that it uses. So they call presence a level of experience where the technology and external physical environment disappear from the user's phenomenal awareness. So essentially just being sucked into the experience. And there's another important definition here that they use a lot, which is affective medium. So that means a medium that can elicit emotions by interacting with it. The actual study itself is pretty simple. They had three experiences. They had a neutral control experience. They had an experience that was sort of anxiety producing, and then they had an experience that was relaxing. And they had a bunch of really interesting questionnaires that they did, which I didn't realize there was so much sort of already established methods for measuring sort of the kinds of emotions that people might have from these experiences. So I found that really interesting. And then there was also already an established way of measuring presence, which I thought was fascinating. So the independent television company Sense of Presence Inventory. So it measures presence in sort of TV or movies. And I thought that was really interesting that there's already ways to measure that that are in place, because that's perfect for virtual reality. So moving on to the next section, some of the results. So they found that the anxious experience reduced happiness and positive affects and increased sadness and anxiety. And the relaxing experience had sort of the opposite effect. So they found sort of exactly what they were going for there. I did see that the biggest effect that they had in the whole study was reduction of anxiety in the relaxing experience, which I found really interesting. And I'm kind of curious about why that might be. I think that probably people are more receptive to relaxing experience. So there's a way of that people, I think, there's a measure of consent there. People want to be relaxed. They want to reduce their negative emotions. And so they allow themselves to be relaxed by the virtual environment. So it was really interesting that.
Sorry, just real quick. I also think it's really interesting here that like all of their findings are significant, like super significant, which brings me to like a problem I had with their measurement tools. And I'm like, they're just like in my opinion, I don't know much about like what you had talking about the presence measures and questionnaires, but it seems like their measurement tools are kind of not optimal. But we can go into that. We can go into that later if we want to continue on.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So you think it's maybe too significant?
It's just like all of their results are like amazing.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And they mentioned in the discussion that maybe they could include like physiological data, perhaps, you know, like skin conductance or something like that. So I know that Wrong, she was at the dinner, Max, and she made this game where you actually wear a heart rate monitor, and it's supposed to induce anxiety in you, and you're supposed to see this correlation with your heart rate. So I think that would have really enhanced the data had they included like heart rate for anxiety and different physiological data on top of these questionnaires. Maybe that would, you know, strengthen their results.
I agree.
Mhm. I did also notice that some of them were just point blank asking when they were in the experience. So while they were in the relaxing experience, they would just say like, "Oh, are you feeling more relaxed?"
Yeah.
And so I can see their
questionnaire. The
yeah,
emotional questionnaire, how are you feeling right now? And it's like, how are you gonna measure presence when you're constantly asking someone how their emotional state is during you're breaking the presence right there. It's like,
yeah, exactly. And also I think people are pretty likely to just be like, "Well, yeah, I guess I feel relaxed during this experience."
you're like bombarded by anxious material. How do you feel right now? Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's something to think about. I still sort of buy maybe it might not have been measured correctly, but I think that their findings though sort of mirror what I've seen with our work in virtual reality. I think it is really an effective medium of eliciting emotions. But yeah, how truly this represents that maybe is up for a little bit of question. So yeah, let me move on to the next. Okay, so this was interesting. So the relaxing experience was the one that was sort of strongest, that people got the most response from. And it also says that the relaxing experience was what they found had the highest level of presence. So they found that there's a relationship between presence and sort of the emotional response you have. And that sort of goes two ways. So the more present you are, the more likely you are to be open to emotional response. And the more emotional response you have, the more present you are. So that's sort of like a feedback loop there, which I found really interesting. So yeah, this just says that there's a positive correlation between presence. The more present you are, the more emotional you can get by an experience. Let's move down a little bit. This is just comparative data. Okay, so yeah, this is a little bit more about what I was talking about before. So the more emotional you get, it does affect presence. And then also the presence was significantly higher in the anxious and relaxing part than the neutral ones. So that would lead you to believe that the emotion is causing the presence. But then a little bit later, they say that it's unlikely that if an experience has low or no feeling of presence, that they would be able to have any emotional response. So it seems like presence gets the ball rolling, and then it creates a feedback loop between emotion and presence. So yeah, that's sort of the crux of the study, and I thought I would want to talk a little bit about a virtual reality experience I went to last year. It was hold on, let me stop sharing here. Okay, so it was Carne and Arena by Iñárritu, and if you guys are probably familiar with this, but if you're not, it was an experience where you sort of got to go through what it would be like to be an immigrant who was arrested by ICE. And that, I think it was designed to elicit emotion, and it was designed to elicit presence. Like they did a really good job of making it feel like you were really there because you're actually in sort of a dirt ground. There was aspects of the experience beforehand where you were sort of actually really in a room that you might be in that environment.
Like a detention center, right?
Yeah, detention center. And I think that he really understood that you needed to be present in a space in order to have that emotional response, and it really, really worked. And the emotional response also sort of makes more concrete the idea that these people are actually people. And I think it's really effective in changing people's minds because they can inhabit the space of someone else and feel more empathy. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
It was amazing. I started crying at the end.
Yeah.
It was really sad.
It was
Really, really sad. Because like they make you take your shoes off and you're walking in the sand because like there's this whole imagery in the beginning about finding the shoes of like deceased immigrants or people like leaving their shoes behind. So you're wearing these little booties and you're walking in cold sand in at LACMA, and yeah, it's totally jacked up. And then like ice pulls up on you, and they have like dogs and trucks, and this like fan is like replicating a helicopter, like hovering over you, and yeah, it was a really emotional experience. It also reminded me of the Exploratorium, Noah, and the speech booth.
Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, it's like this booth where you give a talk or you sell a joke, I think, and there's like uproarious laughter from when you stop. There's uproarious laughter from a digital crowd, and you're like, oh, cool, I'm so funny. And then you do it again, and it's like crickets, and nobody's there, nobody's laughing, and so you feel like self-conscious and awful. And it's an illustration of like it's not even in VR really, it's just like a screen, but the mechanisms of presence and how it can elicit different emotions in you.
Yeah, so I think emotion is sort of a tool that people use, and in that case, I think Inuritu was using it to make a political point. But I think that emotion, when you feel it, tends to make more concrete the sort of ideas that you already have. And sort of an experience that I had is when we were bringing virtual reality to retirement communities. An older man, he was conservative, and he watched an experience about Greek refugees. And when I watched that experience, I obviously felt for the refugees, and my sort of political leanings got stronger. And when he watched it, he recognized that a lot of the refugees in the video were young men, and he thought that that was sort of threatening. He thought of it as sort of an invasion. And so two people can watch the same emotional content and come to 100% different conclusions based off that. And I think that emotion isn't necessarily always used to drive a point, but it's used to make people feel a point more. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, sweet. Can we talk about the methods of this study? I think they're kind of flawed. It's like one thing they're talking about presence and presence bringing about emotion, and I think there's like a lot of research on like what level of quality of content is necessary to elicit presence, and I think it's like an alarmingly little amount. Like it doesn't have to be photorealistic, but you can elicit those emotions, and that's kind of one of the things that we talked about 2 weeks ago in Mel Slater's work about embodying like a lobster and stuff like that. But in this one, I'm curious what techniques they're really using to elicit that emotion. Like one thing, the movement in the space they said is via a joystick, and so there's that. And is there like some sort of feedback? I'm guessing since this is like back in 2007, they probably don't have like controllers or anything. I don't know if there's a representation of an avatar, or if like you look down and there's a body, but what exactly, what technical mechanisms are they doing to elicit presence? Or are they just have a questionnaire that they say like, oh, how did you feel like you were there? So I'm just kind of skeptical. And then like we had just mentioned, like the emotional responses, they break you in the middle of your experience and say, oh, how are you feeling right now? So I just think it's kind of not very well thought through means of measuring those two things.
One thing I also looked at is even just looking at the screenshots of the picture, like how necessary is it for virtual reality to feel those emotions? Even just looking at the pictures, one is much lighter, and I would assume that you feel less anxiety looking at the lighter picture than the darker picture. So I don't know if they took really advantage of that feeling of immersion, and yeah, they might have created presence within it, but you would have felt the same effects even if you weren't present, just by looking at the images, I think.
Yeah. Also, they mentioned in the analysis section that there wasn't any significant difference in the order at which people tried the different experiences. But you take that for, I believe them. But it seems like if you were to try the anxious, they're only 3 minutes long. So if you try the anxious experience first and then jump into like the neutral one and then the relaxing one, I think it's just interesting to see, or I'd like to see how much time was spent in between each one to kind of reset their emotional state. Or if there's research on like the preservation of an emotional state over time and how long it would take for you to jump to neutral.
I do think that it does lead when they did the neutral environment, there was neutral emotion though. So that kind of, I think, makes it a little bit more accurate in that they got a good baseline on it.
Yeah, like where's the nuance? Like it's on a Likert scale, which is cool. Like it's pretty common, like a 5-point, or they said 7-point Likert scale. But it's like maybe that's why they had significant results, because there's no places in between. It's either like you're feeling one way or you're feeling another. So I don't know. And then the standard deviation on a lot of these is like pretty high too, on the Likert scale ones. So if the mean is 1.7 and the standard deviation is 1, that means like a majority of the people fall in the neutral area, which is like, that's cool. So everyone's feeling neutral. Like I don't know. I think it's a cool study, but I think like their methods definitely need leave much to be desired.
Yeah, and it sounds like even the anxious experience and the relaxing experience weren't all that much different. Like they maybe changed lighting, they changed music, but they're both sort of set in the same sort of environment. I feel like they could have, I mean, I've had some virtual reality experience, like the horror movie ones, that made me incredibly anxious. So they probably could have chosen experiences that elicit even more emotions than this one.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. Like I guess it's like a good starting point, but where's the nuance, you know?
Yeah. It did remind me of when we were in the ATC challenge, there was another person who was there who did a virtual reality experience called Viewfinder. And they actually were able to measure people's emotions, and aspects of the game that they were playing would change depending on what the person was feeling. So if the person was really angry or upset, the environment would get, oh, kitty, would get really would get really dark, or if they were happy, it would get lighter. And so I think that is interesting thing to think about, where virtual reality could be used to sort of train people to be able to change and recognize their emotions.
Yeah, that was Erin Reynolds' work. She's a USC graduate. She works at, what is it, Flying Mollusk?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, the concept of like a mood ring is really intriguing. But
Yeah.
even she was like, she was trying to conceptualize the idea, like what use would that information, would you train someone to not feel that emotion or feel it more deeply? Or like how would the information on your current emotional state change or inform what you're experiencing?
Mm-hmm. I was hearing about, there was this device that took your heart rate and it would play a tone based off of your anxiety levels. And so the tone would get higher or lower depending on how anxious you were, and it was fed into your ear. And just the awareness of what emotions you're feeling in terms of a different way to be aware of it, that helped people combat the anxiety that they were feeling. So maybe virtual reality could be used to elicit emotions with people to help people get more in touch with the emotions that they're actually feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All the feels.
Yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. So that was kind of all the ideas that I had, all I wanted to talk about.
So how could you improve this kind of study, or what do you think would be like a good next step on this kind of work?
I would work on the experiences themselves and try to get more dramatic differences between them so you could get really good data. And then I think, yeah, just trying to get some sort of measurement of people's emotions beyond questionnaires. So maybe sort of facial expression recognition or heart rate, or I know sweat, or just other kinds of biofeedback so that they wouldn't have to really just say how they're feeling, but you'd be able to measure it in a more objective way.
Yeah, I agree. Also, like update it in hardware. Like they just said HMD, head mounted display. They didn't say like what system they used. So I think like content has been dramatically improved. So yeah, I agree. Cool. Anything we want to add? I guess this is a shorter meeting. That's cool too. Nothing. Okay. So 2 weeks. Morgan, you want to pick? Morgan volunteered Christina to do the next session. So that will be, what is that? 22nd?
Here, let me look. It will be, yes, 22nd. I will provide the study.
Sweet. And we'll be sharing the Google Doc folder that has like all the sign up sheets and papers and Zoom recordings so people can watch previous ones.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, anything anyone else wants to add? Okay. Thanks, Noah.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.